The last word of Aris Thorne's recording did not so much end as dissolve, eaten by the terminal's low, hungry hum. It left a vacuum in its wake, a pocket of absolute silence that was heavier than any sound. The air in the archive, already thick with the metallic scent of old circuits and settled dust, now tasted of ash. A lie so vast, so fundamental, it had unwritten the world. Kael felt it not as a thought, but as a physical event, a tectonic shift deep in the bedrock of his own soul. His hand, which had been resting on the edge of the console, was numb. He flexed his fingers, watching the slow, stupid motion as if they belonged to someone else. The coarse, recycled fabric of his fatigues grated against his skin, a sudden and unbearable irritation. Every part of his reality had become a prop in a monstrous play, and the stagehands were only now visible, grinning from the wings. He could feel the pressure building behind his eyes, the same crushing force he'd known 1,000 meters beneath the Pacific, where the water squeezed the truth out of steel. But this was worse. This was an implosion of the self. The dishonorable discharge. The shame that had clung to him like a second skin, a cold, wet film he could never scrub away. The incident on Cygnus X-1, S third moon, the one that had cost him his command, his career, his everything. He saw it now, not as a memory, but as a diagnosis. The faulty intel, the malfunctioning gear, the impossible odds. It wasn't a failure. It was a feature. It was the system working as intended. He, Commander Kaelen Voss, had been fed into the grinder like every other piece of surplus humanity, his idealism and training nothing more than fuel for a fire, meant to burn everything clean. He hadn't lost a battle. He'd been a casualty in a purge disguised as a war. Some wars are fought to be lost. The phrase echoed in the hollow space where his convictions used to be. It was the subtitle to his entire miserable existence. No, a voice rasped, Sloane. He'd almost forgotten she was there. Her denial was a brittle thing, a shard of glass against a concrete wall. He turned his head, a slow, painful motion, the muscles in his neck screaming in protest. She stood frozen, her face illuminated by the green-black glow of the active data log. Her usual cynicism, the hard-won armor she wore so well, had been scoured away, leaving behind something raw and aghast. Her knuckles were white, where she gripped the back of a utility chair. "They wouldn't," she whispered, the words directed at the screen, at the Ghost of Thorne, at the universe itself. The resources, the logistics, to fake a century of interstellar war. To build fleets, just to have them destroyed. For what? To control population. There are easier ways. More efficient ways. Her mind, ever the pragmatist, was scrabbling for purchase, trying to find a logical flaw. A crack in the horrifying edifice that had just risen up around them. Kael almost envied her. His mind had skipped that step entirely and gone straight to the abyss. Easier. The word tore itself from his throat. A sound like tearing metal. He pushed himself off the console, his legs unsteady. What's easier than a monster in the dark, Sloane? What's more efficient at making people line up to hand over their food, their rights, their children, than a boogeyman from the stars? He began to pace, a caged animal in the cramped space between server rats. The motion was a desperate attempt to outrun the thoughts that were chasing him down. Each step jarred his bones, a painful reminder of his own physical form, a thing of flesh and blood that had been lied to, used, and marked for disposal. "Think about it," he snarled, the words a torrent of bitter revelation. The contribution cycle. It's not a meritocracy, it's a culling rack. You work yourself to death. You generate resources for the Hegemony's real project, the pristine Martian colonies, the private garden, for the architects of this whole fucking slaughterhouse. And if you can't keep up, if you break, you get the uncycle. You become a non-person. And what do they do with their trash? He stabbed a finger toward the ceiling, toward the imagined heavens, toward Earth. They recycle you. They put a pulse rifle in your hands and point you at the Xeno threat. They send you out to die in a war that was never meant to be won. The pieces were slotting together with sickening, greasy clicks. The corner cutting on his submersible that had cost him his life as a salvager. The shoddy equipment they were issued as grinders. The endless propaganda streams painting the xenomorphids as mindless, ravenous destroyers. It was all part of the same grand, necrotic design. The Hegemony wasn't fighting an alien species. It was farming its own people. Sloane finally looked away from the screen, her gaze meeting his. The shock in her eyes was hardening into something else. Cold fury. "The biology," she murmured, her medic's mind taking over, dissecting the horror into manageable pieces. Thorne said it was a terraforming agent, not an invasive species, a biological tool. That crystalline growth we saw on the hull, on the bodies, it's not a weapon. It's a construction material. It's breaking down inorganic matter. And what? Rebuilding it. Reseeding a planet's biosphere. "It doesn't matter what it is," Kael said, his voice dropping low, shaking with a rage so profound. It felt like it was vibrating in his marrow. "It only matters what they told us it is." They found a miracle, a key to universal life, and they weaponized our fear of it. They painted God as the devil, and then sold us salvation in the form of a gun. He stopped pacing and slammed his fist into a server rack. The hollow boom echoed in the silence. Pain, white and sharp, shot up his arm, a welcome, grounding sensation in the whirlpool of unreality. He leaned his forehead against the cool metal, the smell of hot dust filling his nostrils. He saw the faces of the soldiers who had died under his command on Cygnus. Men and women who had trusted him. He'd pushed them, followed orders, believed in the mission. He'd mourned them as heroes who fell fighting for humanity. The truth was so much uglier. They were industrial waste, their bodies simply another line item on the Hegemony's balance sheet. Sloane walked over to him, her movements careful, deliberate. She didn't touch him, just stood beside him, a silent presence in the storm of his grief and rage. "My parents," she said, her voice flat, devoid of its usual sharp edges. They were historians, pre-hegemony specialists. They were flagged for ideological non-compliance. They questioned the official narrative of the unification wars. One day, they were just gone, vanished into the Hegemony's administrative machine. I was told they were relocated to a re-education facility. She let out a short, brutal laugh that held no humor. I bet they were recycled. First wave, probably, sent to die on some rock we were never meant to hold, all because they asked the wrong questions. The personal connection, the specific gravity of her loss, pierced through Kael's own red haze. He lifted his head from the server rack. He saw the same betrayal reflected in her eyes, the same hollowed-out look of someone who has just learned their entire life was built on a sinkhole. "The linkers," he breathed, another piece falling into place. Jax, the kid's seizures, his terror, his sensitivity to the hive mind. The Hegemony wasn't just exploiting him, they were perverting a natural connection. He wasn't sensing an enemy's battle plans. He was intercepting the bioelectric field of a vast, non-sentient life. Form going about its work. He was a translator for a language the Hegemony had deliberately and violently misinterpreted. They'd turned a potential bridge between species into a tactical weapon. The sheer, multifaceted evil of it was breathtaking. It was a lie that poisoned everything it touched: science, exploration, patriotism, sacrifice. This data, Sloane's voice was a knife's edge. She turned back to the console, her focus narrowing with a terrifying intensity. She tapped a series of commands onto the interface, her fingers flying across the light-sensitive surface. A schematic appeared, showing the archive's internal memory core. Thorne's logs, the ship's telemetry from the other side of that rift, the biological analysis of the terraforming agent. It's all here. Encrypted, but it's here. Kael felt a shift inside him. The rage was still there, a white-hot coal in his gut, but something else was forming around it. A purpose. The chaotic energy began to cool, to harden into a point. He pushed himself away from the server rack and walked to her side, looking at the glowing console. It was no longer just a piece of technology. It was a weapon. It was the truth. "Can you get it?" he asked. His voice was steady now. The voice of a commander again. Not the Hegemony's puppet, but his own. "I can isolate the core files and transfer them to a portable data crystal," she said, without looking up. "But the encryption is military grade, layered. It would take years to crack it with conventional tech. We get this out, and the Hegemony will just bury it in a black site vault." A low, resonant groan echoed through the deck plates beneath their feet. The entire ship shuddered, a deep, metallic sigh of a dying beast. Dust rained down from the ceiling conduits. glittering in the console's light. The external world, the immediate threat, was reasserting itself. They didn't have years. They might not have minutes. "We're not taking it to the Hegemony," Kael said. The decision felt less like a choice and more like an inevitability, the only possible move on a board that had just been flipped over. "We're not getting this out for them. We're getting it out for everyone else." Sloane stopped typing. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and he saw a flicker of the defiant idealist he'd first met on Ganymede. The woman who risked everything to treat the uncycled. "And how do we do that, Kael?" she asked, her tone laced with a weary pragmatism that couldn't quite extinguish the spark of hope. "Broadcast it from the town square. The Hegemony controls every comm channel from here to Mars. This information, in their hands, is a state secret. In our hands, it's just noise. They'll brand us as traitors, terrorists. They'll say the data is faked, alien propaganda. And everyone desperate for the war to be real, for their sacrifices to mean something, will believe them." She was right. The lie was a self-perpetuating machine. It was comfortable, familiar. The truth was a jagged, alien thing that would demand an unbearable price. Before he could answer, the ship groaned again, louder this time. The lights above them flickered once, twice, then died completely, plunging the archive into absolute, suffocating blackness. For a heart-stopping second, the only sound was their own breathing, sharp and panicked in the dark. The green glow of the console was gone. Kael's hand instinctively went to the sidearm, holstered on his thigh. His senses screamed, every nerve ending alive with adrenaline. The smell of ozone was suddenly sharp, acrid. He could feel the faint vibration of the ship's tortured frame traveling up through the soles of his boots. Then, with a sound like a circuit breaker, throwing 1,000,000 amps, the power surged. It wasn't a gentle return. It was a violent resurrection. Emergency lights flared to life, not with their usual steady red glow, but with a blinding strobe-like intensity, pulsing from crimson to white. And back again, the strobes cast the server racks into stark, dancing silhouettes, turning the cramped room into a disorienting cage of light and shadow. Consoles that had been dark and dead for a century sparked, their screens flashing with fragmented lines of code, diagnostic symbols, and error messages. A high-pitched electrical whine filled the air, so intense it felt like a physical pressure against his eardrums. Sloane cried out, shielding her eyes. Kael squinted against the onslaught, trying to get his bearings. The main console in front of them flared, its screen a chaotic cascade of reboot sequences. It was as if a lightning bolt had been channeled directly into the Endeavor's dead heart, shocking its nervous system back to a semblance of life. The strobing stopped as abruptly as it began, plunging them back into darkness. A moment later, the emergency system stabilized, casting the room in a deep, steady, blood-red glow. The electric whine subsided, replaced by the hum of newly awakened systems. And then a new sound. It came from a small comms speaker set into the console. A speaker that had been silent until now. A burst of static, harsh and loud. Then a voice. It was not human. It was synthesized, degraded, torn apart, and stitched back together by a century of decay and a sudden, brutal surge of power. System. Reboot. Initiated. Catastrophic failure. Detected. Core AI integrate at 3%. A pause, filled with the crackle of a phantom carrier wave. "Hello," the voice whispered. A ghost of a question in the dead ship's machine heart. "Is anyone there?"